Well, hi, everybody. This is going to be a pretty exciting special edition of Ask a Pro. We have several people from Housing and Community Development joining us. We have Greg Nickless and John Westfall, and pretty soon we're going to have another gentleman logging in who is also with HCD. And then you probably recognize the gentleman who's probably one side of me, Ryan O'Connell, who is the founder of, I think, a wonderful Facebook group called How to ADU. I personally joined when it had 3,000 members. It is now 10,500 thereabouts. A very safe space for people to ask questions about accessory dwelling units and get some comments from industry professionals, but not to be solicited. So, and then also Ryan has a couple other social media channels that I think he's doing some really good work there. So with that, I know that there's going to be a ton of questions. We have people that are logging on. So if you're watching this live, some best practices. If you would put your questions into the little Q&A area that's on the bottom of the screen, and then either myself or one of the panelists will try to address that and answer it. And if we don't get to it right away, it may be just because we're kind of waiting just a little bit, but rest assured, we will address those questions. So with that, welcome Ryan, welcome Greg, and welcome John.
Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Greg, one of the things that I think has been kind of a common question about accessory dwelling units is, and HCD is just when they run into an issue with a local jurisdiction, which means a city or a county. The HCD is, even though that the state has rules and regulations that, apply to accessory dwelling units, and if a jurisdiction is not necessarily following those guidelines, HCD is not going to come in there with some sort of disciplinary action. You're going to reach out and try to kind of help them understand what the codes are.
I agree to that. Yeah. And it all depends how we receive the information. And I'll get into depth a little bit without taking too much time, how we receive the information. And then if we have sufficient information, which is typically we request that we get something in writing that the applicant or property owner has received from the local agency, rather than just, they wouldn't accept my plans. Well, why? If they wouldn't accept my plans, we're not going to call the agency and say, I need to talk to someone about you not accepting the plans for someone. We need to have some facts. And if we have a good picture, then we will most likely call the jurisdiction and see if there's an issue or get a better understanding of the situation. Maybe we get a chain of emails going. Hopefully the chain's not too long. But that's pretty much about it. The legislature granted HCD the right to review, not the requirement to review, the right to review an adopted accessory dwelling unit ordinance that's submitted to HCD. And then it says if we find things that are not in compliance with law, we're required to inform that agency about what those issues are. If we send them a letter of findings, the law also says they have 30 days to respond to us. And then we start maybe this little bit of back and forth negotiation item again. Worst case that no one wants to get to is that we take that issue that where the agency is not responding adequately, and we notify the state's attorney general. We don't want to go there. No one does.
And you haven't had to go there yet, have you?
No. So we just go. It's a lot of times it's just a misunderstanding. It's maybe inadequate staffing. Cities and counties have got so many other things that they're dealing with. This is a very specialized matter, and there's so much misunderstanding, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and we're here to try to get everyone on the same page. So we start a line of communication.
Good.
But we can't solve everyone's problems because we're just not going to get that information. And we're over 7 million homes in the state, and who knows how many of those are making application for an ADU. There's not enough people or time to resolve every little thing. And as I said earlier, before we went live, every day there's some new twist on what the law is intended to do and what the city or county thinks it says.
One of the things who's an advocate in the ADU space, Steve Vallejos, who is up in Northern California, it was sharing with me years ago, is that the ADU law is going to take time to mature. It's going to take time to kind of settle in. It's going to take time for the state assembly and state senate to kind of, and the policymakers to kind of craft little nuances out of it. One of those being that the owner occupancy was removed, and now for a detached ADU and a primary dwelling, the homeowner does not have to reside in either one of those, and that has a 5-year sort of window that people can build their ADU and they can own, but they can own it, but they don't have to live in either one of those, which is different from a property owner that has a primary house, and within that primary house, a junior ADU, then they have to reside in one of those units. So it's interesting to see, and so I bring that up because I would like to know your perspective. How have you seen, and I think you might have just answered it, it's like you see it change almost every day. Is that?
Well, not a change to law every day, a change, those questions come to us every day. That situation with owner occupancy was in place until the end of 2019. There was a move to just do away with the owner occupant allowance by a local agency, to remove it entirely. But it was negotiated down to say, okay, they got January 1, 2020 through the end of 2024. During that timeline, no application could be required to have the owner occupy the property. When that was approved, it was not retroactive prior to 2020. So if someone was required to be an owner occupant with a permit application in 2019, as an example, that still stands. And the law as it is today, as you mentioned, goes through 2024. Now there are moves in process to eliminate it entirely. There was a lot of fear, I think, on the parts of many people that aren't maybe so pro ADU, that there was going to be an army of speculators come in and buy all these single family homes, create an ADU, and not live anywhere near that property. In what we've seen in the last 2+ years, where there's not been a requirement for owner occupancy, there's been nothing, not a whisper of anything from anyone with a complaint. The JADU situation, yes, it still is in the law, but if there's action that gets approved to not allow cities and counties to require owner occupancy for ADUs, the JADU is proposed to go away too. That
would be interesting.
Okay.
That would
so
be
what the big thing is, what's the difference between someone buying a duplex,
right?
Or so many ADUs can look just, especially if it's an attached ADU, it looks just like a duplex, or a 3-unit, 4-unit, 8-unit, whatever unit, multifamily. The owner is not required to live on the property.
Yeah, and I think it's the worst fears of the people that didn't want to see the changes happen. So they were advocating. Well, they were.
That's most likely the case.
Rallying under that banner of "Watch out, folks! Your neighborhood is going to be transformed."
No. And one of the issues, it got to be an issue with the financing people that were saying, we're going to loan money for an ADU to be created, with an assumption that it's going to be rented, and it's going to generate a certain amount of funds, which will help to go pay back the loan. And if the person that owned the property with the ADU had to move off the property, passed away, for some reason, and their heirs weren't going to live there, then a lot of jurisdictions were saying, you got to remove the ADU. Boy, that's just counter to everything that this program is for, and that is creating additional housing units.
No, I agree with that. We do have a couple questions that are popping up, so I want to get to those as they're coming in. A person saying they have a 2,000 square foot single family home on an 8,000 square foot lot. They are in the process of converting a 400 square foot garage to an ADU, but was wondering if they would be allowed to build a second attached ADU or JADU in the front of the house where the driveway is now.
The short answer is no. The law allows, with a single family home, allows one ADU on the lot. Maximum will be one JADU within the walls of the single family residence, which includes an attached garage. and an ADU. So the most you could get out of the living units you could get out of a property with a single family would be an ADU, a JADU, and the primary unit. And if you build the ADU in a garage, those displaced parking places may not be required to be replaced on site. That means they could be, if there wasn't room on the lot, 8,000 square foot is not going to be an issue. But if it were a very small lot, those parking places that might be in a parking structure or in a parking structure are not required, may not be required to be replaced, which means they might go on the street.
Right. So in a situation where there is a JADU within a structure and they wanted to build on an addition,
yep,
and have that and be an attached ADU,
yes,
that can happen.
You know, without me, it's a little bit of a gray area. There are provisions in statute, we call it the exemption section, where you can create an ADU and a JADU on a lot, but there are the conditions are all on the ADU, that it must be either created within an existing structure or be a brand new construction detached ADU, and it might be limited to 800 square feet. If you had a JADU in a house and then you wanted to go back in and build an ADU, there should probably not be any problem. As I think you mentioned earlier, maybe before we went in live
Right.
here, is that some cities or counties might not read it that way, and that's one of those other things. It's something new every day that we might have to resolve, but there shouldn't be any issue. Under that exemption section, you can do that.
And so if somebody were going to,
let me take that back for just 1 minute.
Sure.
Not as an ADU addition. As I did say, the ADU has to, under the current law, clearly says it can be created within the walls of an existing structure, and that does even include an accessory structure like a detached garage, or as a brand new detached.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Then the next question was about the HCD's ADU handbook, and I think you mentioned that earlier when we were talking before we start. When do you expect that the updates will come out?
Well, the current version, the cover is dated December 2020, but it does not include a law that went into effect in January of 2021. Very minor. It was basically, we call it a cleanup bill, and 2 pieces of legislation that went into effect the 1st of January of this year. So the handbook, which is in the very, very final stages of review and approval, I would hope would go out. I want to see the cover dated March 2022, but we will just wait and see. It currently includes a memo within it on SB 9, because it notes JADUs and ADUs and how they are allowed and might not be allowed by way of SB 9.
And I think, Ryan, you had a couple questions about that.
I think people were saying, are we going to get guidance about SB 9? And is that something that sits under the HCD's purview? So that the fact that there's going to have a little stipulation in the handbook how it relates to ADUs, that's really interesting. Is there anything else that falls under the HCD's purview for that kind of guidance?
Not in SB. I mean, we're not authorized to enforce SB 9. So the memo that's planned to be included in the ADU handbook coming out soon contains that. There's a lot of variables, just like ADU law. There are many variables, and sometimes it depends on what order they occur to. Whether you, through SB 9, you split a lot or you don't split a lot. But SB 9, I think most people will read that it's limited to 2 units per lot, and an ADU is a unit, a JADU is a unit, and of course the primary home is a unit. So what happens when I'm asking this question, I'm not going to answer it. What happens when you already have a single family dwelling with an ADU and a JADU on that lot, or within that home? How could you split another lot off because you've got 3 units that are counted under SB 9? If you had a detached ADU, see, this is one of those variables that will be a new question for one day in the future. If you had a detached ADU and a primary home with a JADU within it, and you wanted to split that lot, maybe that lot line has to go between the detached ADU and the primary dwelling that contains the JADU. It's a work in progress. And
yeah, you've got as many questions as we do.
Said earlier, these dramatic changes to ADU law first went into effect in January of 2017. There was a cleanup, went into effect January of 2018. Then there was nothing for 2019. The laws changed again, or were added to for 2020, for 2021, and now for 2022. So little things, helping to clean up, make it easier, to create more, reduce the fees, reduce the costs. Yes.
Thank you for that one. Anything else on that, Ryan? We have another question from someone who's watching. This is from Renee. She has a question on sanitation districts charging sewer connection fees for ADUs under 750 square feet and requiring them when no new connection is needed. This seems to be an issue at many cities in California. The majority of ADUs and junior ADUs will not need to have a separate new water or sewer connection in order to be built. Instead, most of the time, it will be completely sufficient for the ADU or junior ADU to simply tie into the existing water and or sewer laterals. Regardless, our interpretation of the state law is that any ADU or junior ADU under 750 square feet, whether it requires a new separate connection or not, should not be charged any connection fees. The ADUs over 750, if only they actually require a new separate water and or sewer connection, should be charged a connection fee that is proportional to the size of the ADU. She understands that this is HCD's position as well, but can Greg confirm or elaborate as feasible?
Please note that the reference to 750 square feet is for impact fees.
Mm-hmm.
The current law clearly says, it was text added, that a connection fee and a capacity charge is not considered an impact fee. So a size of 750 square feet in relation to a connection fee or capacity charge, those two are not connected. The requirement for a new sewer or water service may be required for the provider of those services if the ADU is not created within an existing structure. Okay. If it is created, if the ADU, and I'll get to the JADU, if the ADU is created within an existing structure, they may not require a new service to the utility and may not charge a connection fee or capacity charge. So if it's a brand new structure, including an addition, it's up to the special district or water corporation to require it's up to them to require a new connection, and it's up to them to be able to charge the fee. A JADU is exempt, as it says in JADU statute, is not considered for the purposes of sewer, water, and power. It is not considered a new unit and may not be required to provide new services or pay any fee because it's created within the walls of an existing structure. And when the law first went into effect, 2017, 18, 19, it had to incorporate a bedroom within that primary dwelling and may still share a bathroom with that primary dwelling. So it's all you're doing is you're making sure that on a JADU, there's a door directly to the outside. The size doesn't exceed 500 square feet and a few other little things, but that's it. So the 750 square feet only relates to impact fees. And most people know those as park impact fees, transportation impact fees, who knows what other fees a jurisdiction might have. And then after that, they are proportional.
Right. Once it gets above 750.
Yeah. And on the sewer and water, the same thing. If they charge a fee, it must be proportional based on either the square footage of the ADU compared to the square footage of the primary dwelling, or maybe based on the fixture count, same ratio.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that explanation. I'm going to dive in a little bit, and I hopefully get some more questions come up on tiny homes. This is something that I see a lot in conversation, and I've been trying my very best to communicate to people that are interested in them that they are built to the RV or recreational vehicle codes. And as I understand it, recreational vehicles are only intended for occasional occupation. It is not permanent occupation or habitation. So I always try to kind of let people know that there's a completely different set of codes that some of these tiny homes are being built to. And so I guess do you foresee any issues if a homeowner were to buy an RV, park it, and then rent it out permanently, continuously?
Well, John from Codes and Standards will probably also want to comment on this, but let me give you the ADU side of it. It is another variety of housing type. HCD from housing policy in regards to ADUs is not going to say anything about that occurring. It, as I said earlier, it is up to the local agency to allow that. Some do, some asked to make sure that they can, others will not. Now, getting into ADUs and JADUs, as I mentioned, JADUs must be created within the walls of the primary dwelling. Done. Okay, we talked. Now, ADUs are either manufactured homes or they must comply with local building codes, which means that they've gone in through plan check and they have foundation and they have all the necessary things for egress and lighting and heating and all those other things, foundation, etc. So manufactured home, or they've gone through the local building agency because they're to comply with local building codes. A tiny home, who knows how and where that was built on a chassis, someone's backyard, and then they want to transport it someplace and park it. That is not a manufactured home, and it is not done per building codes.
So Greg is the subject matter expert on accessory dwellings. My area is building standards, so I can speak to the tiny homes more further. But just to reiterate what Greg said, manufactured homes are identified in the legislation, in the law, that they are allowable as an ADU. There's as much confusion just as you're sharing on the tiny homes. We did put out an information bulletin. I'll send it to you here as soon as I stop talking, and you can, or I'll try and post it here for the group. But it was issued in 2016. So the confusion went that far back. Oh, you have it. Okay. So the intent of that issuance was, hey, there's a lot of confusion about what is a tiny home. So here are some options. They could be a camping cabin. It could be an RV. It could be a PMRV, a park model RV. It could be built to now with Appendix Q in the California Residential Code. It could be a Title 24 building standard built to the residential code. That's allowable as a tiny home. But mainly, I think primarily the industry, the associations think of tiny homes as the RV by California definition. A recreational vehicle, like you say, is not a permanent dwelling. It is intended for seasonal, emergency, and other use. Okay, so you drive it going camping, okay, and you bring it home and you put it, you have to put your blue tarp over it, right, in your drive. Yeah. So that's the intent. Now, with the advent also on building standards with Appendix X and O, which some of your folks may be familiar with, that has to do with emergency housing, where a city or county declares a local sheltering crisis, subsequently may adopt standards to accommodate the limited shelters that are available, to reduce the standards to allow more shelters available for more displaced people. That's the answer some communities are attempting to, or have attempted to implement to address the local sheltering crisis. Now, the RVs as an ADU, as a result of the emergency housing, I think, and the accessory dwelling unit accommodations, locally they may implement an RV or a park model RV as an accessory dwelling unit locally. We don't recognize that at the state level, because just like you say, it's not a permanent dwelling. But any city or county, 540 of them, can make their own local emergency housing accommodation, impose that or add that to their ADU inventory, if you will. And that's a local city or county question that needs to be asked directly.
John, one of the things that I'm kind of curious about, because I know with Title 25 manufactured homes, and even with a factory built Title 24 compliant, something built, they all have some level of insignia that is required to be placed on those structures. I would be curious to know if you have have an opinion on the RVs, because there are so many people and there's so much money coming into the ADU space where companies are offering ADUs or tiny homes, and they are not sharing or disclosing to what codes they're being built to. And I find that as a really serious problem, because some of the companies are putting modular, here's our modular tiny home. So if you're in the industry, and like I have been for 20 years, modular kind of also denotes factory built. But factory built is this thing that the average person just doesn't understand the way that the codes are termed. And so would be interested if you had an opinion that there should be some state level regulation that whatever you're going to be used for, however you're going to be selling a tiny home or something similar that's going to be occupied, you should be required to to identify what it is in your advertisement or websites.
My opinion, of course, that truth in lending, truth in purchase, and all that, but the due diligence and the of the person who's purchasing is very important, that they understand the nuances here, and hopefully they're all listening out there, because now they can make a more educated purchase. Recreational vehicles are not regulated by Department of Housing. Park model recreational vehicles are not either. Although I think we've had managers that had wanted to go there, but because park models look like a little tiny home, right? But tiny homes, ultimately, back to when I think of someone saying that, I default to the fact they're thinking it's on a chassis with an axle and tires, okay, and a license plate. All right, so that's an RV, and much of my day is carving out and investigating the question that people have on whatever structure or vehicle they're trying to inquire with me about. You're right, modular, prefab, pre-engineered, pre-whatever do not mean anything, and much of the interview to find out what the building standards are, so I can share what the rules are for that building, is taken to make sure we're speaking by the same definitions. I would say that, and I can't speak that the local authorities are going to be necessarily very helpful to be right there. They should understand, though, that a factory built housing and I call that a modular. That's kind of modular is the national term in our state. California is factory built housing. Those are modular products, typically volumetric boxes or panels. All of that work and all of our Title 25 structures are built closed constructed. And that's where you get an insignia in the case of our Title 25 California buildings, or a HUD label in the case of a manufactured home. So those labels, those insignias, give a level of standards that are approved for permanent dwellings. RVs, you may have, because the industry oversees the building standards for that, whether or not they adhere to any standards, but typically A119.5, or I'm sorry, ANSI A119.5 for a park model, and the NFPA 1192 for an RV specifically. Those will guide the your tiny homes on wheels that we probably speak so much to. Does that help?
It does get very confusing because there's so much hype out there. I still think the ADU industry is the wild, wild west. Yeah, and I think there are a lot
It comes
of
down to ask about
Greg's the sheriff of the Wild Wild West.
yeah, ask about the building permit, because you'll have a building permit. You'll have a building permit for an ADU. If a manufactured home is going to serve as an ADU, John, you'll still have a building permit because it's need to go through the planning department at least, and maybe the building department for the foundation and the utilities, right?
Yeah,
So,
the building permit will be specifically for the installation of.
So comes down to, David,
Building,
is there a building permit? If there's not a building permit, beware.
Okay, now, but again, back to the locals with an emergency housing twist, and are allowing the our tiny home on wheels as a means of ADU and emergency housing kind of accommodation. So there are, I don't know they would necessarily issue a building permit for
Probably not.
an RV that's an ADU. I really don't know how that works.
See,
honestly,
it wouldn't be.
but I do know some ordinances and cities and counties have codified that. So,
So no building permit, beware.
Well, I
You'll
think
have a
that
building
also my
permit.
thing is beware, because if they say you can just plug it in, let's just plug it in. I'm like, red flags. That means that you
Oh yeah, yes.
connect the
Yes.
hose, connect
that orange
the electrical,
extension cord.
the extension cord, and you have an ADU that you're going to rent out where I live, city of Burbank, for $2,000
Yeah.
a month rent.
Sewer, water, electricity. You got them underground, or well, two of them are underground.
Yes, one of the codes. Let me ask you this, and I'm sorry, Ryan. I kind of categorize them as Title 25, Title 24, and RVs. So those are kind of like the three big boxes or channels that I'm trying to say, okay, ask the question. Yeah, Greg, you were saying, does it have a building permit? And if it doesn't have one, beware. I've always kind of said, if it's not built to Title 25 or Title 24, beware.
Well, people will say, what's a Title 24 and what's a Title 25? People know what a building permit is.
Then you would say, look for the label if it's an RV, look for the insignia if it's factory built housing, and then look for the HUD label if it is a manufactured home. And those are, and actually the Title 25 really identify the types of industrialized buildings that can be built off-site.
Right.
And each of those, because they're built off-site, they're closed constructed and need to be inspected in the factory. That's where our HCD third-party inspectors go visit those factories to make sure that they're inspected, just as any building inspector would inspect an on-site constructed home. So it's either has the Title 25 insignia or label. Now,
Right.
Factory-built housing is a Title 25 structure, but the building standards point to Title 24 as the building standards for that type of structure, which is just the same as you would design approve any local constructed building. So
Right.
it's Title 24. And then I think you're right. The RV is totally separate because we don't regulate that. Title 25 says, hey, we don't do this anymore. The industry took it back.
Ryan, you had a question.
Yeah, sometimes I'll see people put in a Title 25 manufactured housing on what doesn't seem like a very permanent foundation. They go through the process of getting a building permit and getting permanent sewer, water, electrical, but maybe it's crushed gravel and up on blocks almost. Is that something that the local jurisdiction can have rules about, and like how permanent the foundation needs to be for it to be an ADU? Or can any homeowner go and do that right now within the other regulations of ADUs?
Any homeowner can do that right now. And homeowner by statute will tell the building department the type of permanency for the foundation. Now, for a manufactured home, when we say permanent foundation, it doesn't mean it's going to be there in perpetuity forever, okay? Permanent foundations, when we're talking manufactured homes, and this is Code of Federal Regulations, as well as our local state law, or state regulations, indicate the permanent foundation only means it's built to a standard, and that standard is recognized by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the lending institution that will be typically giving a mortgage for that. They want to see a permanent foundation. They want to see it paying taxes, real property taxes, and that permanent foundation, quote unquote, standard is what the minimum accepted to meet those loan requirements. That's the short answer.
And to continue on what John said, Ryan, is that what you're talking about, what you've seen is it's called an above ground set. And so it has the piers and paths underneath it. It has these tie downs that kind of keep it so it's going to do well in an earthquake. And John said pay taxes. What the instrument or the document is that helps that is the 433A, which basically records that manufactured home, which to the land that it is going to be resting on. So it kind of removes the serial numbers from HCD's records. And it now becomes one with the property. It's part of it. That's the 433A document.
And locally assessed by your county assessor. Yeah. Real property.
It's recorded with just like John said, the county or the tax assessment office jurisdiction that is there. It doesn't look it's not any different than a manufactured home set up in a manufactured home community. And I want to kind of jump on this one really quick too, because there are certain exceptions with the Title 25 manufactured homes with an ADU. One of them is that they're not required to have solar. So a Title 25 manufactured home is not required to have solar panels. So they're kind of
shocked. Is that shocking
to some people
in
that
California?
Think they know.
So I say this. I've told Greg this over and over again that manufactured homes are built to federal standards. So they'll work in California, they'll work in Alabama, they'll work in Minnesota, and unlike California standards in Title 24, where we like to put a lot of energy goals and electric vehicle charging stations and photovoltaic power generation, manufactured homes are really affordability. Maintenance is the most important thing, not a lot of bells and whistles, meeting current technology and those things. Now they're probably years behind, but what we're left with, a manufactured home, is probably the best means for housing affordability for most of America. So
affordability and ADUs, what? How is there? Okay.
You just got to wait now a year or two to get it built, though, because there's a.
Don't get me started on that, John. I mean, I got a quote to do a project in 24 months, and I'm like, what? Yeah, So somebody put into and yes, for a layperson, this group kind of banding about terms that we all understand really well is hard to kind of digest. Manufactured homes are built to a state code regulated by Housing and Community Development, HCD. Above HCD is the Housing and Urban Development, HUD. So that's the federal level. HCDs are state level, and they regulate anything that is going to be built in a factory. And you've heard John say closed construction, meaning that you have your walls, they have the electrical or the plumbing is already in those walls, the insulation is in those walls, and the drywall is put on there. So it is closed up before it is taken to your home or your site, so that the local jurisdiction is not going to be able to inspect it. So they have to have inspectors, third-party people that go in to make sure that everything has been built according to the state's requirements for that home. The Title 24 is actually the energy component of the state's code, the California building codes. And that's kind of how you kind of say that's going to be the state's local jurisdiction. With local jurisdictions, that's Title 24. Am I right with that?
Kind of. So the Code of Federal Regulations set the HUD standards. HCD does not get involved in that. HUD has their own third-party agencies. They're called the DAPIA. They're called the IPIA. who does design review and in-plant inspections in Arizona, in Oregon, in whatever state that the building's manufactured in, regardless of where it's sent to. So that's that. In California, we have our own factories that build HUD products, but Arizona and Oregon feed the north and south areas quite regularly with those type of buildings. The Title 24 California Building Standards Code includes building standards, framing, energy, structural, electrical, plumbing, mechanical, instead of the HUD code or the manufactured home construction safety standards is what they call the Code of Federal Regulations. So it's a different recipe book for factory built housing that we set here locally in the state. The recipe book for manufactured homes is set by HUD. And so that's kind of the way to look. I kind of look at it, a recipe for HUD or a recipe for HCD.
Greg, did you raise your hand?
No, I did not. I had to mute for a moment.
Okay, no worries. We had a follow-up question to the one that was earlier about the JADU ADU. And so he says to the follow-up, I said, as mentioned, I am allowed to have one ADU and one JADU. He said he's still a little unclear on the answer based on the situation. The ADU will be my 400 square foot garage. Am I allowed to add new construction 500 square foot JADU, or would I need to build an addition to the home and then convert to JADU?
Second part, probably the second part. A JADU can be within a proposed or existing single family residence. That addition in that gray area in between, where there's no single family dwelling and it's proposed, or where there's an existing single family, it's an existing, is that other. So yes, there's at least one jurisdiction that we've spoken to says we know what their goal is, and so we're going to allow them to add on, do a small addition to the primary dwelling as part of their JADU application. You may have to add on to the home, expand the walls, so that when you go in for your permit for your JADU, it's within the walls of the single family residence. So the answer is there's not truly an answer, but they could get pushback from the local agency that says it's not within the walls of the single family dwelling. So you add on to it.
A similar kind of question. If you're proposing a detached ADU, is that a single family dwelling structure that can contain a JADU in it?
Primary dwelling, the single family residence. A JADU has to be within that, not an accessory structure. Even a detached garage is an accessory structure. An ADU detached is an accessory structure or building per ADU statute. So if you get that question, go ask your jurisdiction if they allow you to do it as one step rather than take two. But absolutely, with a second step, expand the walls and then do the JADU, that's absolutely allowed. It might be up to the local jurisdiction to do it the way as the question was posed in the question.
So it's just the steps in the process that you have to
It
follow.
may be, yes.
Okay,
And it's one of several that might occur that way in at least this law.
Right. Now, I think that there's just a way to be able to kind of look at it. And this is where
It's
hiring
doable.
a consultant or a specialist to kind of help navigate, kind of the codes of the local jurisdiction would be really important. So we have just a little bit more time. Greg, what are some of the most frequent questions you get on a daily or weekly basis for people who are going through the ADU process?
Well, I wish we had a tally of which category each one of the questions is in. It's across the board. It's everything you can imagine. It's anything from how many ADUs can I build in an existing multifamily dwelling structure to how many of them can I do that and also build detached with a multifamily dwelling structure. People want to talk about zones all the time. Zones don't matter. If an area is allowed to have ADUs, if they're zoned for single family or multifamily. Essentially, if it's zoned for residential, not zoned, it's zoned to allow single family and multifamily. For instance, we get this, we've had this a lot. Sometimes these various questions, they come through in waves, but a lot of times is the city or county won't allow me to have an ADU because my property is zoned agricultural. Does it allow, the question from us is, does it allow a single family or multifamily dwelling? Yes, then it allows an ADU. It's not residential zoning, it's zoning that allows residential. So that's a big one. A lot of them, fees is a big one. How many you can have is another one. Parking exemptions is another one. Now that the law has changed, it allows ADUs in, I'll say, commonly known as gated communities, but it really more specifically is common interest developments, where there's property within that development that is commonly owned by all the properties in that development. Can I do an ADU? And the answer is absolutely yes. The law now, the Civil Code 4751, says any provision in CC&Rs that don't allow an ADU or JADU are void and unenforceable. And the only really restriction, and it says clearly in about the 2.5 paragraph section of that bill or that law, that the conditions may not really expand beyond, or can expand beyond costs, but costs shall not be a great impact to the creation of an ADU or JADU. So those, it's all over.
Yeah. One of the things I think that I see a lot, and let me take that back. What confused me when I first got into it is the impact fees, because it's like, oh, you're not going to be charged impact fees. But the part of it that I think is hard for people new to this and are starting and asking the question, where do I start? Is like, you think that there's impact fees are the costs that the jurisdiction is going to charge you to get your building permit. But the impact fee is just one component. And then you have all of your utility companies or your fire department or all of the other agencies that are within the jurisdiction that are going to assess and take some money from you. And
that's right. And you need to closely take a look at what is an impact fee. Examples of what are not impact fees are plan check fee, not an impact fee. Building permit fee, not an impact fee. Sewer connection fee, not an impact fee. Capacity charge for utilities, not an impact fee. You might have an electrical or gas utility. Those are not impact fees. Those are fees to provide services and facilities. You'll have impact fees, and it's, you could dig into the state law to see what is an impact fee addressed by Municipal Code 66,000. And then take a look at each one of the fees that the jurisdiction or someone wants to charge and to see if it is an impact fee or not. And as we've already discussed, if the ADU is less than 750 square feet, they may not be charged. If it's over, the fee must be proportional. So many fees are not impact fees. Drainage fees, sewer fees, park fees are probably impact fees. Transportation is typically an impact fee, but there's no list. And you're going to find it's the fees without having to pay any impact fee will be probably in the 5 figures. I mean, you can almost guarantee it.
Yeah,
More in some places than in others.
Yeah, I think that for our ADU, we're probably just under 8,000. We're doing 734 square feet in the city of Burbank. So a gentleman just joined, Timothy just joined. He says, is there any program or spreadsheet for determining the maximum JADU, ADU on a given lot? So I don't know if there's necessarily a spreadsheet, but the max is that 500 for a JADU. And then it's either 1,000 or 1,200 square feet on a single family lot. It's in
the law. It's as you just said, it's in JADU law. 500 square feet is the max. An ADU is there are about 4 different size categories in ADU law. State law says a new detached ADU is limited to 1,200 square feet. State ADU on that point, state ADU law also says a local agency may adopt an ADU ordinance that is less restrictive, meaning they could allow a much larger detached ADU. If an ADU is added onto an existing dwelling, it's limited to 50% per state law, 50% of the existing size of that dwelling, but is also allowed to be at least 800 square feet. Now, the other one is cities and counties with an adopted ADU ordinance may limit the size to no less than 850 square feet for a studio or one bedroom, and no less than 1,000 square feet for an ADU with more than one bedroom. An ADU that's created within existing space, whether that's an accessory structure or a primary dwelling, does not have a limit to size. So an extreme example is you had a house with a 2,000 square foot detached garage. You can convert that entire 2,000 square feet to an ADU by state law. So there's a lot of different sizes. But in the bottom line, always at least an 800 square foot ADU is allowed.
So as we see cities develop new design regulations or engineer different ways to calculate daylight planes and really complicated things that do have limits on new construction, 800 square feet, 4-foot setback, 16-foot height, always going to be allowed.
Yes.
Is that fair?
And since you mentioned daylight planes, those are off the table. Because if you had a daylight plane that went more than 4 feet from a side or rear lot line, then state law prevails, and you could build an ADU. They couldn't require you to create the ADU more than 4 feet from a side or rear lot line. Which gets into, a thing is if you had a house 5 foot from a side lot line, a typical side yard setback for the primary dwelling, and you wanted to build an ADU above it, you could cantilever 1 foot and make that ADU 4 foot from the side property line as a 2-story. You can probably rest assured you're going to violate a plane.
And then real quickly, another question was, so Timothy, the question is is there a public document for Wikipedia for ADUs? There's a handbook. You may not see it in the chat, but if you just Google HCD ADU handbook, there was one issued in 2020, and one will be very likely updated within the next several months.
Certainly.
As Greg said earlier, so that is the presiding document. Also, the bill number for ADU. What was the most recent amendment or the bill that created ADUs? Do you remember that?
That created ADUs?
Was it AB something, or it was an SB?
Well, AB 345 further expanded the law, saying an ADU may be sold separately from the primary dwelling on the lot, but with a lot of conditions. And then SB 9, some minor impacts maybe to ADUs, JADUs. Other than that, prior, effective January 2021, was AB 3182, a cleanup bill, minor.
I'll add to the kind of wiki resources that if you hire a professional that belongs to the Casita Coalition, they assemble a database of all the communications that they've seen between jurisdictions, the HCD, and official kind of state proclamations. And that's a very helpful resource. It's not something I'd advise an individual homeowner to get, but if you're working with somebody who works with that group, then they have access to that database. And that's pretty cool too.
In addition to that, besides the handbook, the ADU handbook, you just go to the HCD ADU webpage. Much more information available on the webpage than even within the handbook.
I agree that the HCD's website has a lot of information. It's very dense, and it can take you to a lot of really great places. And Ryan mentioned the Casita Coalition. Can you expand on that just a little bit of what that actually is?
My understanding, is that it's an interest group with common interest group that lobbies for and helps policy advancement for ADUs. They also work with a lot of stakeholders. I always see them doing webinars on best practices for cities on how to implement ADU rules. I see them do professional webinars on how to serve the ADU market. So it's very, they were really seminal in creating a lot of the the movement and momentum for accessory dwelling units and other forms of housing. And they're a great resource for professionals to plug into ADUs. That's how I understand it. My small role on this finance subcommittee was helping cobble together one of the many documents that they've put together and put out.
No, I agree. It is a good coalition. It's a group. They're interested in pro housing. They want to get people to understand the complexities of ADUs, and I think that they're doing really good work. As we wrap up, John, do you have any closing thoughts?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I just added a few comments. One on the RV permanency of in some parks, we call them special occupancy parks by regulation, but a special occupancy park is really intended to be, I think 30 days is the limit. It may be somewhere in regulations or maybe just a good gauge to have. I don't know, but yes, in fact, I would think that, you know, if you're in Imperial County and in an RV park, that there may be some forgiveness about 30 days and you could probably stay a lot longer. I don't know, but we don't enforce, you know, how long people stay in there in parks. There's plenty of work for our HCD inspectors that actually inspect building standards and park standards in mobile home parks and in special occupancy parks. So again, if there's any questions that your folks have, you know, we're here to answer them at Department of Housing. I can help you with the building standards, 433As for manufactured homes and any other issues. We troubleshoot that every day. And that guy is the ADU guru. So
He's the sheriff. I'm going to say the sheriff, John. Thank you for that. Ryan, any closing thoughts? I'm going to give the last word to Greg.
Oh, great.
Okay, Greg, any sort of closing thoughts,
Well,
comments,
one
advice,
thing,
recommendations?
Ryan did mention something. He said the word funding. So I just wanted to let everyone know that since September of last year, Cal HFA has a funding program for the creation of ADUs with maybe it's up to $25,000 grants. That link to Cal HFA is at the HCD ADU webpage. I don't have it memorized, but Cal HFA has ADU funding.
Yeah, we'll make sure we put some links in there so they can go to the HCD's ADU website.
So,
and
all application is made through Cal HFA. What's that?
sign me up, Greg.
Yeah. I don't have money.
John, so Greg and John, Anona helped put this together. I want to thank her and thank everybody who brought you two to this webinar to provide this very important information. I know we could go on for hours, but I do want to be very respectful for everybody's time on a Friday afternoon. Ryan, thank you for the opportunity to bring Ask a Pro webinars to everybody. It's really fantastic. Everybody have a wonderful day, rest of it, and a wonderful weekend.
Great. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.